that's just now tuning into YouTube and Twitch, well, just decided to click them on. I was over in Leeds last night watching John Mayer and Sean Johnson in their money match. Good little game that. Unfortunately, John didn't come out as winner, but it was a good night.
Can you stride, mate?
Just had a few pictures through of people watching the stream already. I'm sure they'll be coming through thick and fast later on. So for those, I know we've capped it off now with the entrance that we're in. We're hoping to get a few more in, but tomorrow's the qualifier for the East Yorkshire Shootout, Golden Break Shootout. We're just doing a round robin format for that. Looks like it could be. So let's watch his top. We're alright there. He's rather ran it though. Black top left. We've only got the one camera angle for today. Just using me. Yes, Dean, I've just put it up on YouTube. Should be. Let me just check. If not, I will have a look, see where it's going wrong. Just. Unsure. I'll have a look why it's not done it. Pardon me. Let's have a look, see why it's not doing it. Ah, yeah, it's gone under the wrong name. So to anyone that's currently watching it over on YouTube, decided to put it under the wrong name. Honestly, Michael Beck and Lee Harrison aren't playing again. So I'll just go in and change that. My bad. Oh god. You know what I hate the most is when someone puts the video of the stream on and all I can hear is my own voice. I hate it. Oh, it's not that one. I'll send you a link to it now. YouTube decided to have a bit of this if it.
You'll give you his 10 minutes.
Yeah, cheers. Yeah.
I'll give you from the last.
All right, cheers.
And then I'll keep on top of it for you.
What's tennis for?
That's when you.
Do they just pay you? I'm working at 6.
Right, let me.
Plus I make one by then and brush my teeth.
Have you been here all night?
No, I went home, but here's one I'm not for me.
Right, there we are. To those that are watching, hopefully it'll be all right. If not, could be a stream issue. Anyone that's watching on YouTube, just let us know. Cheers, Duggar. Just let us know how it copes. too bad. However, for a minute, I'll put my headset down and just munch on my food.
sorry? Oh yeah, you can, yeah. Only for the core comms. Some of the core comms that I'm keen. Oh, right, sweet. Are you doing it? Oh, you're busy. Oh. What about the... What about the... It smells really nice. Go on, mate. How many tabs you got open? Fucking hell.
You like, by the way.
Have we got many viewers?
There's a few, there's about 20. I'll bring child through.
That'd be quite an interesting game, this. With Yogg's late session last night. Yeah. Oh, good hit, Mike. What's that for?
Scores, yellows, yellow reds, red yellows.
Alright.
Yellow red, red yellow, white balls, skulls. Just control the stream.
Why are they putting the balls?
What? Is that on there? Ooh, yogs on reds in it.
No, Yogg's. Yellows.
No, it shows them.
Oh.
Oh, right, so when... What? Oh, so now when it's on, you press it?
Yeah.
Let's see, so you can see who's what colour.
Really the best.
Could be an option.
Could be, should be, will be.
Could be Android charge, would it?
I've got to remember I give you one.
Yeah. Shouldn't be box.
I've just dropped my phone off at that shop up there. 35 quid for new battery.
Well, that's it.
Charge my phone rather than going to 50
One.
on Melbourne as well.
I know.
Like,
I know, just making conversation about batteries.
I'm freezing.
Nice shot, Mike.
Can't decide we're saying half a two or half a two.
Is there a plug? There might be a plug in there. Right. There will be one in my bag. Do you want to watch him now?
It's a bad one. Should be this frame gone. Oh, it's not there. Oh, what's he played there? Got a chance. Ooh, good effort. What, you got McDonald's there? That's an order something for me, yeah. No, I'm alright, thank you. How would you describe it? As a bit of a scrappy opening couple of frames? Feeling the way into it? That's not a shot. Shot, Mike!
Watch this another 2-1 lead.
Oh, that's not a good shot. That is not a good shot. It's going to play you. Good effort. He's doing well there. He managed to leap black and tied the other yellows up.
Left to swerve.
Yeah, he's not bad at swerves, it, Mike. He's a bit of a basher. It's good. Shot, Mike. That's nowhere near.
Cold.
United. Anyone know who this is?
No.
I'm gonna spam it.
Oh, young.
Come on, Yogley.
What have you going to want to, really? Oh, dear me.
That's it again.
Who passed him? You give me phone envy now. Getting phone envy. Half an hour with no phone, I'm fucking trembling. Oh shit as well, sorry.
I don't get why you put it up because you're not even saying anything.
He wants to
Well,
be live,
I've got no one to commentate with me.
I will be soon.
I need some colour to commentate against, you know. You ever watch wrestling?
I'm not full until
Evening.
what makes you can't make it better?
I thought that was a fucking.
Come on, heard about you slinging a bottle of black sambuca down your neck.
At work as well this morning. 7 o'clock.
I'll give you a game till 2, but I'm playing Kate Ringe at 2.
I've
See you again.
Hi, pal. Hi, mate.
booked
How are
table
you?
for a few hours. I fancied a game.
Yeah, man. Hello, you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm pretty young.
Yeah, not bad.
Sound really good and I'm hanging on. Gonna get there. Might make it to 6.
Yeah, not much. Just Paul plays. Yeah. Neil.
Two on to Yob in it. Yeah. 2 on to go on. But yeah.
That's me. Coco.
Got Mike.
Got push for table.
Yeah, it's next.
You only got done yesterday. It's too bad.
You know when you put it in, when you join us, election is over, like,
I know. But I'm saying, they only got done yesterday. Table 3. You know they're pushing 3 times a week. I'm aware of what I'm aware.
3, not all.
3 times a week. I do them. Stefan comes in twice a week. There's fucking 7 days a week. That's 2 days.
I'm brushing 9 to 5 right now.
You can't be pushing 9. I left the iron on for an hour.
I'll sit the warm at 7 o'clock when we start.
Yeah, ask the carpet down there. How I like to sleep.
Yeah, I noticed that cat.
Only been in about 4 weeks.
No, I left it on for about 7 hours. Mother.
Check you on.
Robert.
I was playing on Facebook, pushing one.
Yeah, Robert. I'm playing on 3, but I'll push 1.
Well, I thought he was good on that.
No, you just beat nice, aren't you, brother? Some less stuff there.
Pushing that still, but I'll nothing.
How do you push it? Up and down?
What? What am I doing? I'm trying to find correct answer.
You said that they've been killing you.
Yeah, they're actually brought a new file.
Anyway, someone's coming and saying, oh, you can hear it.
What?
What's Neil?
All you can hear is something.
Yeah, it's just other side of the room as well, Jamie.
Let's do the mic.
That's mine. I forgot to have it.
That's yours, Christian.
That man. Oh, that's. There you go.
You shit yourself, sunshine, you're a child. It's your generation.
Ah, well.
He's actually done really well in this Remmers jog because about 4 shots ago he was knackered.
Well, I think it doesn't help that he hadn't had any sleep. He was sleeping on the snooker table earlier.
Was he?
He was having a little wee nap, weren't he? He was like, just
Likes the attention.
attention. Attention, there's no one in the room. I think that's opposite attention, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh.
Unless Casper the Ghost is in and he can...
Can you zoom in on this?
I think he's left his gap. You use.
See the pure damage that Ashley caused last night through Jägermeister. My God.
Shot your ankle. Oh,
Well, he's left that a bit short.
yeah. Just feather behind it, wasn't he?
Pandora's box.
Yep, what's this? Yeah, a bit of a sauce just walked in, lads. Is that your sister, Ash?
Nice little touch. Is it frozen, that?
I think he'd be behind that yellow now.
Didn't know if that were frozen.
We double kissed.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
yeah.
why did it, didn't it?
Yeah, that's
We haven't said now.
He hadn't said anything.
He admitted to a foul at 6-all last week in that comp. 6-all first to 7, and he favoured a ball that no one saw with his hand.
Aye, aye.
Yep. I think he was playing snooker more than anything, but he'll take it.
Commentate partner now.
That's scary, isn't it?
Better than the one I've got now.
I've got some good lines on it.
Right, I'm going.
Can we see
I'm
who's-
off.
Can we see who's watching?
Well, we can't see who's watching, we can see who's comment.
Well, if my bird's watching, I won't try and chat her up.
20. 25 people are watching, so there's a one in. Oh, it
She's
depends.
stuck in traffic, I doubt she will be. Shut Mike.
Two cushion.
looks good.
Nice little touch.
Yellow passes now, well.
Yeah, off the red, I'd imagine.
He's got a free shot at the yellow, hasn't he now? He can cut it into bottom bag. Or top bag as well, looking at it. And he can run to relatively safety and take over yellows at middle.
Pest matter.
Cheers there, Bill.
Yeah, just ask him when he's a good one, so well
I
done.
think this is a safety now.
Yeah, just he'll know what he wants. Trying to fuck off my way. Doesn't matter. Won't be here long enough to remember, isn't it?
What are you on about?
It's my master.
Who's your friend?
Alex.
Alex, yeah. What's the boy's name?
I get to touch that, not you.
Oh, Monkey Basie.
Yeah, I just hear that, right?
Yeah, what, is she one of them?
Huh?
Is she one of them?
No, but I did watch it perfect time 2 days ago.
You see it?
Ducky ducky.
If she's got a fanny like your gob, I'm not interested.
Oh god. Come on, man, there's kids watching. Christ. There's kids watching.
This kid's watching.
Yeah,
Stop talking about your mum's tuppence like that, like.
pipe down. Sorry, I just lost that frame.
Yog won it.
You're going at 2 apiece. I'm like too busy trying to make sure I don't get shut down from BBC.
What?
Any guidelines in it, you know what I mean?
I don't think they're bothered about what I say.
I can't decide if I've burnt my coil out.
You burnt your coil.
What
Burnt,
did they say?
Is that an innuendo?
burnt.
What? No, my coil and music.
That's what you called it.
Alex, this is mine. You wanna know it's got a messed up one. Welcome to rock and roll. What now?
Yep, she's back. Best behaviour. Oh, it's good set on it.
Well, I think they've gone for a toilet break.
Right, well, with that, I'm going to go and get something to eat and maybe have a look at this bird here.
See you in a bit.
Wish me luck.
No chance.
Oh, yeah.
Oh dear. Right, I'll be back when they both come back. See you soon. Well, the lads are back and like foul broke and gave Yogs re-rack and a chance to do something with these. Right, gloves is doubles. He's got another chance now to develop that Leo, unless it goes past that red. Might do off the cushion. Might squeeze past. I do. Look at the timetable. Hopefully the don't go missing on the next fag break or avoid having one. We're back on time. Still got a few matches to go with it. Yeah, races to 9. Four frames in an hour. It's let me just
Sorry,
I will be back shortly.
Brad.
No.
Oh, my brother.
Oh, for. It's one then, isn't it? Classy Scarborough bird.
What? Classic Scarborough. Not from Scarborough. Where are you from?
Unnumby.
The village.
That's even worse.
Weirdo.
No. You're from somewhere where you can't talk properly. And aren't
I'm
you?
from
Don't
Sheffield.
you live in Pickering?
I'm Pickering, yeah. What's up with Pickering, like? What's up with Pickering?
Well, do you want to continue this really good conversation that we're all about?
Yeah, because what's in Wimbledon? What's in Wimbledon?
What's good that's in everything? Me.
Other than you.
Like, there used to be like 12 pubs. But now like 8. And Hunnaby was the biggest village in Yorkshire for probably 15 years. Emmerdale Farm's been running longer than... Well, Hunnaby was a Viking village, so it's been running quite a while actually. It's got IBS. Well, just move on, yogurts. Oh, shit. Sorry. Not bad, was it? Slide up when you will.
It's not like Mike to play an erratic shot.
Wow, that's way too loud for Mike.
On your birthday.
I know, you could hear me fingering my chip.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll tell you something. This will be a very long game for Yog.
Shots like that it will be, yeah. It'll be here all week.
What?
Can happen though, can't it? One guy struggling, the other guy gets brought down with it.
Simon says this is terrible. Shall we have a game of what Simon says?
Well, to be fair, Simon's not wrong. It's not been the best of openings, has it?
No. Yog's looking like left foot first, right foot second type job.
Well, he's from Fleets and he's probably got 2 left feet.
Oh wow. Australia will be fuming for that. Damn. Oh. John King's having a walkover.
Here he is, the king man.
The King.
You got? Oh, is that for me?
Next 2 games.
Oh,
Thank you.
So there's just
Yeah.
Matty and thingy to sort it out.
Cheers.
oh, I've got to pay. I thought this commentary was in lieu.
Commentary in lieu. God damn it.
You must be doing a good commentary. Viewers haven't gone down that much.
Well, when that bird was here, we were getting
Right?
ratings were going through the roof, and that bird was here. Yeah, all the lines were coming out. But then it's dark in here. A bit of light shone in. It wasn't the 8 I thought it was. It was a solid 3.4 with wind behind her back.
Talking about my Alex? Yeah. Fucking 8.4 with wind behind the bar.
3.4 wind behind her back.
Should show you what fucking turn you've ever had.
Give better to Beatty.
You've never, ever seen it.
Oh, God.
Never seen it.
It's 3-3, not 4-2.
Oh, is it 3? Oh.
I know. I want it to be 4-2. I want to get it over with quick, but I think we're here for a long time, not a good time.
Yeah, you're here for a long time, mate. You're on tonight.
Yeah, I'm going to disappear to arcade in a little bit and
Go and play 2p machines.
I'm going to go and hammer a
Hook a
light
duck.
nudge.
Yeah.
You need to get cabin fever if not, don't you?
A whack-a-mole and 2p machines. Go on, lad. Go on when you bird a teddy.
I was thinking more than terrible key rings. With 13 ball, isn't it? It's a 13 ball on the key ring. Have they started again now, Paul and
No, because Paul's... No.
oh, is that going to be on here?
I'll have to have a look, see which one's on there.
I thought it was on stream. There's Spencer's on the side table with Kate and Paul.
Let's have a look. Where is it?
Well, that's a nice setup there.
Let's where's John King? Is he? Neil Rooks and Paul Ringe.
Oh, yeah, that one there, yeah. It's a bit strange that they're he's practicing his wife.
Yeah.
She's a good player.
Yeah, Kate's a very good player. Very steady away.
Strange, I would say, like, oh, she's a good player for a woman. We have, like, different standards, don't we? But there's no difference between, like, a woman playing pole and a guy playing pole. It's not like football where
No,
you're
it's
physically and fast, physically stronger and faster. It's,
This is why I don't get... I'm not... don't get why, like, county, for example, women have to play at least 2 games, or maybe 1 or 2, in the women's section before they can play with the, as they call it, the men's.
yeah.
Well, why?
Yeah.
Why? It's pool. It's like, for our county, there's some lasses that would rather play with lads.
God, yeah.
You know, better day, better atmosphere.
How many women do you need for a county team?
7, I think it is.
I say because they're not men struggling, aren't they? For numbers, well, I know York can.
Well, we kind of struggled on last thing because we're up at A's and B's were at Stockton, which is like 2-hour drive,
Yep.
and then C's are in Northumberland, which is a 3-hour drive.
Just tracking it.
It's a trek for 4 frames a pool, man.
So whereabouts are they playing Stockton? Is that where that green base
Room
is?
21, very good venue. It's the one at Stockton. Teesside play there as well.
Ah, right. We were at Thornby the other week. So it's not far away from it. Where there's that green base snooker centre.
Oh, yeah.
They do queues and all, you need to read a bit.
Yeah.
And downstairs is a pool hall and snooker hall.
Yeah, and then we've got North Yorkshire in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, come.
Whatever. No, they usually play at Clock House. Clock
Yeah,
House.
yeah, come.
Oh, is that what? No.
Where's all the comments gone?
No one's been commenting
Has
anything.
has it dried up?
Oh, here we go.
No, I've still got it. This is terrible.
Yes, Lee, we certainly did smash it. Bad miss there from Yogi, he's not very happy at all.
I wasn't watching those. Hey, miss that melody? Oh dear me.
Yeah, he missed red into top right bag. So 4-3. Mike leads.
Oh, Mike was yelling. Oh, I might have been watching. I was on my phone.
Yeah, sorry.
I was actually falling asleep. I hadn't heard her for 15 seconds. Oh, no, she's there. What was that? Wait a second. No, you're right. I've got a bed, thank you.
I wouldn't if I were you. I wouldn't.
Ooh. She must be this morning.
My laugh is well dirty.
Jumped up there. Think Cat 6 have a chance in this game? Yes, they do. Jamie. Oh, Matty, just read that comment from Jamie, mate.
Yeah, I agree.
Definitely. Definitely will agree.
Hey, who's this? Who's chipped on that? I agree with that last comment.
Oh dear.
Anyway, back to the pool. Looks like Mike's yellows.
Back to the pool. Yeah.
Ashley Halifax. Heard he likes, what's that, an avocado? No, I don't.
Avocado.
I don't like fruit.
Avocados.
I'm more of a quarter pounder of cheese kind of guy than an avocado kind of guy.
It's not an avocado, it's a fucking...
Well, why would you put an avocado if you don't mean avocado?
Avocado's a green, mate.
That's an avocado, isn't it?
No, that's not.
Oh, no, but well, I'm inexperienced with fruit and vegetables. Oh, it's symbolic, is it? Is it a bobby?
Is it symbolic?
Pickering talk's coming out.
Oh dear. Right. That's...
Oh, it's got to take off. My daddy's coming to watch tonight. That'd be nice.
Yeah.
Oh.
G-I-R-T-H.
Yeah, how's your getting on here? What are we at? Reds? Only 4 more visits each in this frame yet. I don't like how this chat's just, gone filth really, hasn't it?
Oh dear.
Yog. We're trying to commentate on pool here.
Trying to commentate on Paul Yogg's like playing like we shouldn't be.
Yeah, Yog's making hard work of us commentating.
Yeah, he's just
I'll lose it will to live.
Sweating in a corner.
Speak for yourself. I've got 4 t-shirts with me today and 2 cans of antiperspirant. This isn't my first rodeo.
Here we go. See how this red.
There's nobody seen me sat here with a bear wrapped around me.
I was actually watching him practice earlier and he played 4 skill shots in a row like this and made all 4, so he's going to miss this obviously. Does practice make perfect? I've got a quid, he gets it. No?
Oh, he's got it.
It's 5 out of 5 on them.
Where's your white? Where's your white?
He hasn't, has he?
Yes, he has.
You what?
Looking at
I didn't. What? Did he screw
He's
up one cushion and back into the same pocket of black?
Yes.
Oh dear me.
Matty 6 shirts. Oh, that's just...
I've actually been shopping today and bought 2 more shirts, just in case I run out of t-shirts tonight.
What?
What, not using wrapping cloth?
It's just for sure. What? Is?
Unlucky, Yon. Well, it's not unlucky. You put it there, to be honest. Not one to kick a man when he's down, though.
oh, Matty.
Turn what down?
No.
Oh, people want to hear what
You
we're
sat
saying.
right next to us.
Got headphones on.
Right. I opened up Reddit. Oh, this is...
That's a long way off. You think by now, like 8 frames in, they'd have a little bit of flow and rhythm, wouldn't you?
That'll be a new coil for that.
What, are we going on stream and chat?
Don't drink. Don't drink.
Tell you, what a skunk.
What the hell's just come out of your gob there? Pardon me. Well, Mike's let Yog in here.
Oh yeah, what's happening at Pearl? Yeah, Pearl.
Yeah, what's... I'm sure he's gone and try and cheer up Yog. Yog looks...
Oh, he's right in eye line looking right up her skirt there. I don't know if that's going to cheer him
Oh
up or not.
god, get on, matter. It's supposed to be PG, yeah.
I was winding up last night saying, I said she's probably had 8 mile of cock. And she took that as a compliment.
Oh god. Give over.
Oh, she's on a bit of a delay there.
Oh, on the straight.
Eight mile, Ash. 8 mile.
You've got someone.
I can't hear you.
Oh dear. We don't need it. No.
Well, yeah.
Well,
For Young to give her 8 inch, you'd have to do it 4 times.
Mike's Left a chance here for Yog just to play this red down and just off cushion.
Yeah, let's get about pool now.
Let's get back. You never started. Could be.
Well, at least we haven't started, let's be honest.
Well, I'll say that his left might
Come
be
on,
a
mate.
massive chance here.
Massive. Where's that yellow go?
Middle pocket.
Does it pass pull out? Oh, well, yeah.
Both middles.
Yeah, he's got a drop on it, hasn't he?
Yeah.
Oh, he's got.
He's going cross double.
No, he
and,
might. I think
double.
yeah, I think he'll drop this in and take the double. If you can get white just below black, is that alright? Bit pacey.
He's going to have to hit this with a bit of pace.
I prefer going cushion. So you're not good, so you can hope on black. I'll go cushion first here, and then back kick the yellow into the middle. Come on, Mike. Cushion first. Kick that yellow into the middle. White steps
Can't
dead
be
for black.
cushion first.
That's what I'd cook.
Can't be that way either.
I bet wish you went my way now.
Big miss there from Jorgen, mate.
Well, we were practicing earlier and it doesn't take anything to that bottom pocket off that rail, and he knows that. And he still played at that pace.
Yeah. But just a drop in here, straight drop in.
No, Mike will give it a bit of a scud and give it a chance to miss. Oh, nice play.
6-3 and Yogs.
I did say if Mike goes on a free frame run here, that'll probably be it. Yogs front queue on table. Looks like you don't want to be here.
We didn't want to be here at 11 this morning, mate.
Well, that's true. We're talking about pool, Ash. Like we're here for.
Yeah, that way. Oh, pardon me. That wonderful game. Actually, we stood outside like, Sam, have you got a key? Why would I have a key? Couldn't get in.
Oh yeah, she's about 10 seconds behind us. Well, what's new?
Ask her a question and that's it, innit? Yeah, reply like a bit after. It's like old Morse code, innit? Beep, 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 beep.
You fucking horrible bastards, aren't you?
We should get around go comms really, but she'd be all over me like a cheap suit.
See what I mean? 20-second delay there. You know what I mean? It's quarter. Chance here for you could probably just pop some balls actually, because he's been missing some shots that he wouldn't normally miss.
Yeah, I think it's a case in this kind of frame we need to just, like I said, just run, even if it's not going to finish, just run 4 balls in just to get a bit of confidence. And before the game's going, no, he's going to get another visit, isn't he?
Yeah.
Just get used to seeing balls drop down the hole. I guess that passes. Are you in charge of music, Ash, tonight?
I am, babes.
Can we have something not like this depressing stuff on?
You've requested this, and it's not all about you, Matty. So we're just going to let Yog have his golden half an hour, please. So
Yog can choose music for a 100 quid game, and I'm playing for 1600, and I can't choose a bit of it. I want a bit of 80s.
Yog chose this music, so later on, when we come to it, you can have your music.
A bit of 80s,
I've
please.
got some
Bit of
Spectre on
80s,
for you,
oh
how
dear.
about that?
Some what?
Dear.
Spectre.
Spectre?
Spectre.
Oh, it's a film. I don't know what's a film.
Spectre.
Spectre. It sounds like some you millennials listen to. It'd be some. Sounds like whales shagging or something.
Spectre.
I want a bit of 80. I want some Duran Duran. Something to get me pumped up.
Some driving this stadium.
Okay, Dougie, hang on. Oh, he's gone to KFC, Dougie, I'm afraid. He's just sent me a picture of 2 trays of food he's ordered.
Oh my god. Can you ask him to bring me back whatever you
Ring him
want?
back.
That
You've
was-
just eaten. You've just eaten something.
Oh, grief I got about bringing McDonald's in. Now you want me to bring one back for you?
No.
I've got some left if you want. There's some chips left.
No, I want one of those push balls.
Crush'ems.
He's back now. Well, he sent me that like 20 minutes ago. Have you not seen John King eat? They'll be lucky if there's a tray left.
Like, where's my tray gone? Here we go. Well, he's got to play it double, but it's leaving the skill shot. It's hard with that yellow.
That's
so.
not a skill shot there. I think he's just going to try and get around back of it, is he?
Does it go round back of it?
Yeah. Well, if he played it like, properly.
If you played it properly, it would have. But
I think if Mike gets these, I think it's pretty much home, innit? With Yog's state of mind. That's alright. Drop into the middle, drop into the bottom left, and then squeeze it this way with the red. What's up? Oh, you got a wicket. Is that first ball?
no, it's like second over.
Yeah, but didn't they do that in the other innings? And get the guy
Yeah,
out second
yeah,
ball,
but
then
then,
the pile
like,
on 400 and something.
Smith just comes in and that's it. Oh, he's got a right
Shot
fluke
Mike.
there.
I think, did he fluke? Can you
Yeah.
rewind? Because I was watching cricket. He's missed that. Oh!
7-3.
How did he fluke it then? 'Cause
I'll show you.
Surely he was taking it to bottom pocket past the
No, like, it was just a... Comboed. Comboed? I'm not American. What am I doing? I'm looking for you. Here it is. Ashley's got his own background and that's all I can hear is my voice.
From here. You had it there. Yeah, from there though.
Yeah,
Right, and then he's...
yeah. He gets a nice little 2-in-1. Boom, boom.
Oh, that's not a fluke, that's a great shot. I don't for one second think he played it, but it looked...
Yogg's breathing into his towel. Probably trying to get a bit of more oxygen out of it.
I think he'd have more chance if it was soaked with acid, to be honest.
So Mike leading 7 frames to 3 in a race to 9. He breaks and I think one's gone in. One's gone in now, definitely.
Yeah, that's a red one. Yeah, it was only red that dropped in. Was that you, Ash?
No, it's Sam.
What? Was what me? Definitely weren't me.
How uncouth.
Big wonder how big his hoof is. Let's keep it PG, Martin. Stop having sitcoms turning PG.
Keep it PG, I'm not the one that's sending avocados on chat.
Avocados, I love it. Here we go, he's gone.
God.
Oh, he's gone to bring that red out and he's.
It's good, I need to clear it, but it's,
Yeah.
well, at least he got rid of one of them. So, you know, we're going to look for positives, aren't you? No, he's young yellow. I haven't put this on there.
Yeah, he's yours,
Yellow,
yeah.
yellow, let's get that on there then. Oh, this could be 2. It is 2.
2.
Mr. Locke's arrived. I'm quite looking forward to that game actually. Sam Locke v Spence Ward. That'll be really good. Might just after watching this.
Anything won't be.
I think an episode of Coronation Street looked pretty good compared to this. I'm only joking, Mike, when you watch this back. Saying that, I don't even think he'd probably watch it back himself. So Mike's got ball as now. Right, now these Reds. Right, what's he going to do here? He's got to do something with the yellow and the red that's tied up there together, hasn't he? Just drop that yellow onto the bottom cushion. Oh no, Mike, what are you doing? Sure, that was a shot, wasn't it? The red and yellow in the middle of the table.
Possibly, yeah.
Push the yellow onto the cushion.
Tried to take some of the collar over there.
What? What's up with you?
The viewers are loving this, by the way. My one-sided banter toward you. They're just filling in the blanks with what you're saying, but they're loving what I'm saying.
I'm just wondering what she's just come over moaning about.
She's a woman, it could be anything.
Controversial.
Am I wrong? Anyway, back on pool. I didn't see what happened, but Mike somehow got rid of that awkward red. And if you can find a hole for this black, he's going on the hill.
2 pockets to go for.
4. No,
Yeah,
3.
but
It won't pass that yellow, will it?
yeah, that's 4 going in. I was you'd hope for the 2 middle pockets,
Yeah.
and then
I don't think he's ever going to get going around off that angle, really. But with how Yogg's playing, does he get these 6? Even though they're all at open dollies. That's no one gone, is it? Oh no, it's
no,
Oh, good effort, Mike. Come on, Yog. If you don't get these, you might as well put his cue back in case, hasn't he?
quite possibly, yes.
Optimism.
Here we go.
Oh, Yog. Has he rushed that?
Yeah, he just got down and cued it. He's not even thought about it, really. He's on the hill.
He's going to land some bets today, is Mike. I know, I was talking to the bookie at way and he had a couple of troubles today. Mike was in all 3 of them.
8 frames to 3, Mike now leads in a race to 9. Oh dear.
Feel like
You feel like what? Rob, who's co-commentating?
Ah, well,
Some weirdo.
he's talking out his all in here, Rob, same as usual.
Some geezer called Matty Gardner. Ow, that hurt.
Yeah, these cameras, these microphones do pick up, don't they?
They pick it up for our ears, but not everyone else has. Just turn that down a little. That down. And that. That'll do. That'll be better.
What's that new? We can't see.
Oh yeah, go on.
Oh, did you have the enough break there, or was it Mike's break? Either way, he's in with Reds. What time are we now? We're nearly 3 o'clock. I'll tell you what,
Yeah.
we're not going to get these games played off, are we?
No.
Robbo, are you playing your game now? Are you starting your game now? Are you starting your game now?
Whichever.
Kate Ranger, I'm going to get smacked up.
Robbo doesn't get slapped about by a bird.
Oh, yeah.
He's only going to cost £100.
Charlie.
Bit aside.
Do we know who's what colour yet?
I've just seen the last shot and I totally blanked on it. Spencer's on his way. Young's on Reds.
Quite a difficult player to gauge, is Mike, because you can take out a clearance that you just don't see there, and then you can miss a straight simple ball, 3 shots in a row. So in a race to 9, I don't really know, how we'll reduce. But yeah, he's doing real well today, actually. Well, he ain't doing really well. They've both played pretty bad, and someone's got to win for him, haven't they?
Yeah, it's both been scrappy at times. As I was saying that.
Kissing point.
Yeah. It's not been the most fluid pool, has it? Oops.
I see Ashley's bringing the stream down again on the chat.
Asher's just,
Just filming, she.
I'm shocked that stayed in. No.
I can see York leaving himself a tough black here.
Yeah, he's gonna.
Because he's going to hit the first yellow. Even if he catches that fin, he's going to hit the second one. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
But at least he's put on Mike's safe. Again, that was quick. And nowhere really near.
No, it's-
Unlucky, babe. Wasn't unlucky.
Close to bread.
Have you seen that?
That wasn't unlucky. It's a bad shot.
Shut up. My pro fucking pool edge.
Losing a 5 and finding the pin is unlucky.
So there you go, you just drop this one in that he's closest to now.
Honest, Howard. Can you not give him a bit of
No, he wants his ass kicking, to be honest. I'm not going to give him any pep talk or pep up.
Pepper.
He wants his ass kicking.
There we go.
oh, you're being a bit bitter.
No, I am, yes, because he cost me money last
I
night.
won't start
Your pockets are empty.
doubling this though. Play the one on the right on rail first, play it down, cover in or over.
Yeah, as long as
White, just play it
he
in
pushes it
between
through
the
a
two
foot,
yellows.
he gets a snooker, doesn't he?
Yeah, that's it. He was lining up the double at first, the one nearest to the black.
Well, that's either win or lose, isn't it?
That's a ballsy shot, is that? There we go, see?
Oh, mate. Wait,
He's had a right lucky
he's played
shot
a bit
there.
of safety in mind.
Safety, as long as that's not touching.
He's in trouble if it
Touching.
is. I've seen better shots than that.
Playing.
What's Rob say? Rob, did you get a reply off JR? He's got a good chance of getting Snooker back if he hits anything down here. Lots of blocker balls. Oh, he's nailed it. Shot, Mike!
Very nice shot. I couldn't cope with doing that though, leaving my chalk on tape.
That does annoy me when I'm playing, yeah.
You know, on table side of drink the table.
And it's not exactly a quick play at the best of times.
No, it'll wind me up that too much.
I don't like playing this shot really, unless he's topping it through to cover Snooker. Well, he did, but he didn't.
Right, either stick it in your pocket or stick it on pool table. It's played that.
Come on, dog! Hey, should I give him a bit of pep there, right?
Sticking where?
Well, I've seen enough of this game. I'm going to go down to Bucky's and put a bet on.
See you in a bit.
Stream.
Who's next on the stream?
It's Ruxy, innit?
Yeah.
And then John Shane. But I think they'll probably end up going onto a side table. So I don't think Adam wants to be any later than 7 starting.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Neil Rooks, Paul Ringe.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I imagine the. Is that
A fag
John
break
King?
now, are you kidding?
Oh, you can't have a fag break.
Yeah, drink it up.
Can't have a fag break. We're miles behind.
Yog!
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 Oh.
Yog!
Yog!
James!
Too far behind, man.
You're 2 hours behind. Ask John. Ask John, see what he says.
Is that you?
If you want.
Mike, got 3 more games to fit in. I'm just saying. So yeah, 3 with this, yeah. Still 2. In 4 hours. This is taking 2.
Only reason why I said that though is because
To be fair, I'm not a fan of going out for
the last toilet break was 15 minutes.
yeah.
I know people like to have a break, but if we knew it were going to be just a few minutes, then yeah.
It's almost an interval and a break, isn't it? But
Well, it's half time at footy, innit?
yeah.
Poor lads have been running around for 45 minutes.
These lads have been playing 45 shots a frame. They've been knackered as well. But no, I did have an issue with Cam Thomas when I played him in one of the Rock and Roll events. It was first away, and he just pulled a frame back to go 7-6. And it was my break. I started racking him up, and he says, "Do you mind if I go for a fag?" And I said, "Yeah." and he laughed, thinking I was joking. And I'm like, "No." And he starts walking around the table. I'm like, "No, Cam, I want to finish it. There's 2 frames left at most." So I want to get on with it, because it was a comp. So you need tables, don't you?
Yeah.
And he went anyway, and I wasn't happy.
I think it's one of them I don't smoke, so
Well,
it
yeah.
infuriates me
I
when
don't as well,
people
yeah.
get smoke breaks. Because it's
Well, the worst thing
like,
was, I think he was fucking vaping anyway.
because
He just wanted to knock me out with a ribbon, I think.
yeah, well that's all it is.
Yeah,
It's a
psychological.
clever psychology way.
Well, it didn't
But the
work, 'cause when he
prob-
came back
no,
after
but-
10 minutes, I broke and dishes. So.
But it looks a bit weird if we keep going to the toilet every 10 minutes like they do for a fag, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, maybe you've got. I might be
Coming
small,
back a bit happy as well.
Yeah, I wound up there, didn't I? But I don't know. Like last night, I played Cam, and like 4-3. He said, do you mind if we go for a fag? I'm like, no, 4-3. I don't mind that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But it's 7-6 first to 8. I think you can hold out. Those couple of minutes.
That's it, yeah. I know, like, he's already, probably, Adam's already told you, doesn't he, that he doesn't really want to start anywhere later. Because he just asked me, like, to keep him in touch with what's happening, because he don't want to be waiting, like, 2 hours for a table.
Yeah, I understand that.
And it's understandable at the end of the day.
Right, 3 o'clock game's going to start in a minute. I'll be back in a bit.
See you in a bit. You'll be alright, yeah? Yeah. So, I'm a pro hustler. What's that? Who's it? I'm going to show you. Just to bring this Y back. The black, top left, to win 9 frames to 3. There it is, all the way. Mike Bears beats James Thornton 9 frames to 4, should I say. To kick us off on the first one. Next matchup will be on soon. Fresh stream for everything. We'll see you very shortly for that one. See you soon, guys.